meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. April, I'm really happy to have you on the show today. I'm just thankful for this opportunity to hear your perspective, your story. And I want to give our listeners just a little bit of context before we begin. You're an adoptee, former foster youth, former foster sister, your wife, a mother of two, and a full-time college student and a business owner of an adoption coaching business. Girl!
I tell people exciting. I'm never bored.
You're never bored. And I do want to mention the name of your adoption coaching business, Mercy and Healing. It's an LLC. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we will link, if you want us to that in the show notes. So Absolutely. Let us know. Okay. So I want to mention something you wrote before this. You wrote, I see God's hand in every step of my life, protecting me and leading me. And because of that, I have a fire inside of me of His love that I try to spread to as many people as I can. Mm-hmm. I love that. I can hear the passion. And what I've learned through doing a little bit of preparing for this conversation is that you really have a passion for specifically adoptees and adoptive parents to really help them heal some of those primal adoption wounds. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it took me probably the age of 24 till I even knew what a primal wound was and even realized that there was adoption specific trauma. And if I can save kiddos 20 years and allow them to start those healing journeys that much sooner, my job will be complete.
I love that. And maybe for those who aren't familiar with that verbiage, how would you describe a primal wound?
Absolutely. And so one of the unpopular and popular statements is adoption is trauma. And that can be really polarizing, especially in the social media context. And so I prefer trauma as a prerequisite to adoption. Hopefully, by the grace of God, our adoptive families are amazing and awesome and help to heal the primal wound in us. But listening to your birth mother's voice for 9 months, feeling her movements, the first thing they do when a baby is born is put it on that mother's chest. And for those of us who maybe had that experience, but then were ripped away, or some of us who never even had that experience, there is an opportunity, and dare I say, there is trauma there. And then, building into that of how I had really great adoptive parents, but I didn't understand that it was okay to miss my biological family, that is how God created family, a man and a wife and kids, and for them to stay together. And when there is sin involved, again, there's an opportunity for trauma to be there. And so that is the primal wound of abandonment, of a lack of self-worth, of wanting and longing for the way God created family. And most of the time that never being able to happen with adoptees.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that way. We were actually just talking with one of our teammates here who is due to have a baby in just 30 days. And just talking about how sometimes we can even see that hand. Like she said, I can see the hand pushing out of the belly or kicking under the ribs. And it's like, we think of that, but we don't think necessarily about, how the baby hears the mom. And how you're so connected in such an intimate way. And then for our kids who've been adopted, a lot of times I think we can naively think, well, if they were a baby, they didn't know any different, right? And really that's a big part of your story. And I think maybe that's a good place to start is when you first entered foster care. Let's talk about how old you were and kind of a little bit of your journey there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my birth mother had already had 5 kids taken away by the time she got pregnant with me due to abuse and neglect. And so she tested positive for drugs. When I was born, I tested positive for drugs. And so they didn't even let me go home with her. I went straight into an emergency foster home. And then from there, my half sister, same mom, different dad, was in foster care. And they contacted those foster parents and said, hey, birth mom just had another baby. Would you be willing to take her in? And my parents said, absolutely. They were very pro all of the things we know now that are so important, like keeping siblings together. They were ahead of their time is what I say. And they said, absolutely, we want to keep these sisters together. You know, who knows where this will end up, but we want to keep the sisters together. And so I spent the first 2 years of my life in foster care, again, by the grace and protection of God. That is the one and only foster home I've ever been in, besides the emergency one, straight out of the hospital. That is the only mom and dad I ever knew. And when I was 2 and my sister was 4, we were officially adopted by them.
Okay. Wow. Do you remember when adoption kind of became real to you, like in the sense that you knew you were adopted, and how you kind of processed some of that?
Yeah, so I don't remember a defining moment, which is how it should be, right? We should always be telling our adopted kids that they're adopted, sharing parts of their story as they grow up. There should never be this like, oh, you're 12, guess what? You're adopted. Like all the movies love to add into
the one
their
big reveal.
Yeah. And I think even more so for me, my adoptive parents just stopped doing foster care 6 months ago. And so I grew up as a foster sister also. And so that was my normal of social workers and biological families and reunification in the best cases and kiddos going to other adoptive homes. And so even more so for me than most adopted kids, it was part of my everyday life. But I always knew it was an open door. My adoptive parents always said, we will help you look for biological family when you're ready. And there was never a shame. There was never a competition. And I always knew that that door was open to talk to my parents because they talked to me first about it. And so another big part of that was my half sister. She had her dad come back into her life. And then that along came a grandfather, an aunt, and a grandmother. And even though those were her family members, because we had different dads, they just swooped me in, included me in all the birthday presents and Christmas presents and outings. And so I grew up with a really healthy, best case scenario of this is what it looks like for a biological family and an adoptive family to partner together for the best interest of the child. And so that was my normal, and it was amazing. That's how it definitely should be done.
That's awesome. And even with that, you still have had to navigate abandonment issues. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And traumas, right? So it's like sometimes we think if we do it all right, it'll be okay. And the reality is we live in a broken world, and we're just going to have to go through. We have to go through that to kind of understand who actually can meet our real needs, which ultimately Jesus is the one and only. Do you remember when you learned your mom's story, like the fact that she was born, you addicted to drugs, those sorts of things?
Again, I don't.
Okay.
That was never something, my mom, adoptive mom, had very limited information because my biological mom was in and out of jail, in and out of even the county. And my only contact with her is I have a picture when I was about 8 months old with her. And that's it. That's the last time I've seen her. And so I just remember knowing those pieces of my story. And of course, I know it was age appropriate. My mom, I know, just didn't throw it at me when I was 2. But there are ways to word that, your mother struggled with some things, and she really, she tried to find things to help her pain, to help all of the things that she had been through. And then as I grew up, your mother, you were tested positive for meth when you were born. And then I think this is a big thing. And again, it's dependent on kiddo and age and maturity. But my adoptive mother, kept every single piece of paperwork she had. And for me, that is something I wanted. I wanted the paperwork from when my bio mom's parental rights were terminated. I wanted the paperwork from when I first went into care. I physically wanted to hold those and read those, and I still have them. And it's still hard for me sometimes to look at those. But for adoptees and foster youth, a lot of our pieces of our story we don't have. And I argue, I'd rather you have way too much and your child never be interested in it. You throw stuff away and then they do, would be way worse than that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you grew up with other foster siblings coming and going. And how did this impact you as an adoptee? How did that kind of connect with you?
Yeah. It was hard. I think that's the easiest word for it. And I've done a pretty controversial blog post on my blog about this. And this is not a black and white issue. It's a gray issue. Yeah. But if you're going to adopt and continue to do foster care, there are things you should be aware of. A child leaving your home may trigger that abandonment in your adopted child. Your adopted child, and I argue your biological children, need to have a say in it. They need to say, hey, I need a break. I need, a couple years or a couple months where it's just me. And I was not given that. Right, wrong, and different. There's been a lot of healing that I've had with my adopted mom since becoming an adult, going to therapy myself, realizing therapy, becoming a mom myself, I think has allowed me to extend a lot of grace to my parents. But there's definitely a level of traumatization, that is possible if you are doing foster care with adoptees in your home. Of course, there were great things that I think, all foster homes, it gave me the opportunity to really appreciate what I had, to really have Jesus break my heart for what broke his, to realize that we were given much so that we could love others well with that. I was changing diapers since I was like the age of 5. And so it gave me a lot of child rearing skills. So there, of course, was a lot of positive, but it is a situation in which to just kind of have all eyes open, all ears open, and really be open to those permanent kids in your home and making sure that they have a voice in what often is the chaos of foster care.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's super important. When you did have your children, are both of your children biological?
Yes.
So how was that when you had your babies? Did that bring up stuff?
That is what propulsed me onto the healing journey. With my first, she's now 6. My husband was active duty military, and he was stationed in Korea, and I was not allowed to go with him. And so he came home for the birth and left when she was 4 weeks old. And you want to talk about abandonment trauma? Oh
my goodness. I mean, that's hard for anybody, abandonment trauma or not, but then you add that on top of it. Wow.
And I couldn't put a finger on it. I just, of course I was anxious and I was depressed, but I kind of just put my head down and just did it because I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the recognition to realize what was really going on. And then when my second was born, where my husband was there and every single struggle came back, I was like, what is going on? I thought this was because my husband was gone. And so that it was like, I need help. I need to figure out what is going on. Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And it brought up a lot of anger for me against my birth mom. How could you hold this precious, dependent, sweet little baby and not snap back to reality, not get it together? And of course, since then, I've done a lot of healing. I recognize that addiction is a disease and that is, a coping mechanism and all of the things, but my heart needed to be healed. My brain knew, but my heart needed to be healed. More than that, I needed permission to feel the anger. I think a lot of adoptees aren't given that permission to feel the hurt, the anger, the frustration, being able to scream and cry and how dare you, because I had to do that to get to the healing part. I couldn't just act like everything was okay and actually have everything be okay without getting all the emotions out first.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we, maybe more so now, have been thinking about how it's good for our kids, our adopted children who've been adopted, to feel this love and connection with their birth family. And, but I think that what you're bringing is also a really good point about, we also need to feel the anger towards them. We have to feel all the feelings, whatever we feel, we got to feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember any specific times when that, was there a point when the anger kind of, or the healing process or all of that was so intense that it was almost overwhelming?
Yeah, multiple times. I mean, the thing that triggered me into therapy, and I've shared this before because I think it's so taboo, and I will share it, is I was so angry at my kids. I took a teddy bear and I threw it across the room, and immediately I was like, who are you? What are you doing? And you are the opposite kind of mom that you want to be. You so desperately want to be this loving, compassionate, physical touch mom, and you just can't. And that was my wake up call of you need help. You can't do this on your own. There is an anger deep down inside of you that you've never been able to feel. And let's go get that. And I think, that was, my youngest is now 4. And so that was probably about 3 years ago. And then shortly after that, my husband transitioned out of active duty military. And if anyone has been through that, that probably is one of the most stressful moments of your life, where you've always had a steady paycheck. You've always had healthcare, and all of a sudden you're giving all of that up. And we don't regret it, but it's definitely an understated, stressful time where he went from job to job, and we were saying, what are we doing? How are we putting food on the table? And so there were absolutely low moments in that of, I can't do this. Our marriage was struggling. I had to learn how my wounds were impacting my marriage, which was hard. It was hard for me to hold a mirror up to that place of my life. It was easier for some reason to hold it up to other places. And so I really had to, I would say this past year, the 2022 kind of has been the first year where both my husband and I have felt like we can breathe, where we felt like, man, all of those low moments were worth it. But even last year, we had some really low moments, and we're like, okay, we know we're going to be okay. And we know where to get the help, but it's still hard.
Oh, yeah. And I think too that I imagine it's harder when, let's say someone who has abused drugs or alcohol, and they are now on their healing journey and they're working through it. It's like, in some ways they can say, okay, I did this, and so I have to go through the hard healing, which is, I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I'm thinking about you didn't do anything but yet you had to still go through the hard healing, right? You were just born.
Yeah.
And yet you had to go through the hard healing. I think sometimes that's just really, I imagine that's really hard to think, why do I have to deal with these emotions? Why do I have to feel this when I didn't do anything?
And I think that's where, the grace of God comes in, and where you have to humble yourself and realize, I am a sinner, and absolutely I will have triggers, but it is up to me to not put those triggers on my children, to break generational trauma that you were born into, that there have been generations before me in my birth family of addiction, and not being addicted to a substance. That's not good enough. Let's dig in deeper so that I am not carrying on this generational trauma. And so absolutely, I think it does take a level of humility, but I think it does for any sort of healing to happen.
Because the reality is, anyone who's done anything negative, harmful, there's always a reason. And generally it's they've been harmed or hurt themselves, right?
Absolutely.
Nobody wakes up and says, well, I just want to go destroy my life.
Yeah.
And yet, like you said, we're all born into sin, right? And so it does require, that's where we have to look back at why Jesus came on the cross in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
he actually is going to give us freedom from that if we believe that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and let him do his work. I think that this kind of reminds me of the quote I saw that you shared on Instagram. You said, we repeat what we don't repair.
Mm-hmm.
Is this kind of what you're talking about? Is there any more to kind of share along those lines?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of my therapist's quotes.
I love it.
And it's so good because I think, especially in adoption, okay, we're removed from the biological family, so it no longer affects me anymore. But when you realize the patterns and you realize, no, it does affect you. And, you know, even in our marriage, marriage is one of the most humbling things because there are things that your parents did great, but there are probably things that your parents didn't do great.
For
And
sure.
unless you figure out the root of those and you repair them, you're going to continue to do it in your marriage. You're going to continue to do it in parenting, and you're going to continue to do it in yourself. And so I just think it goes spider webs into all aspects of life unless you repeat or unless you repair. You're going to repeat. There's like no other option there. And so you can either dig in. Repairing is a whole lot harder, but then you can change the course of your marriage and the course of your mental health and the course of your kids. And that's so powerful. It's worth it.
Yeah. We used to tell our little kids, some that came through foster care, you guys are going to be cycle breakers. And of course, they had no idea what that meant at the time, but we believed that for them, right?
Yeah.
There was a generational cycle of hurt and brokenness, and they don't have to repeat that.
Yeah.
You also had I don't know if you quoted this or if you just wrote it, but I'm whole but healing. I'd love to hear more about kind of what prompted that. And I like that saying, I'm whole but healing.
Yeah. I think especially when you think of your identity, and if you're looking for that anywhere but Christ, you're not going to be whole. You're never going to be whole. And so to accept the fact that, okay, I am whole in Christ, but that I will never stop healing. I will never stop growing. I will never stop the sanctification process. That is what we're called to on this earth. It kind of frees you. It kind of frees you then to love Jesus without strings attached, to be the best mom I can be, but realize my kids are still going to need Jesus, to be the best wife that I can be, but my husband is still going to need Jesus, and I'm not going to be their everything. The only place we can find wholeness is in Christ, but that there's still healing we're called to do on this earth.
Yeah. I really love the freedom that does come, because we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to arrive. Like, it's not going to happen. It's not possible. But don't we try so hard? You know, we just want to be like, okay, I made it. I conquered that completely. But it does keep us on our knees too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You also shared about a year ago that you found your biological father. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. It's still something I feel like I'm in shock some days. Yeah. So probably about, goodness, trying to get the years straight here. So June of 2021, I did Ancestry. My in-laws got us all kits. And of course, you know, it sat on top of the fridge until June. And I did it in June. I sent it off, and goodness, I'm like, I want to have a support group just about this for adoptees, because the feelings you're feeling until you get that first ding on Ancestry of like, you have matched relatives.
Oh my goodness.
And even before that, I guess this story really starts when my parents, of course, adoptive parents always said, if you want to look for family, we're here for you. So on court paperwork, terminating parental rights, a man's name was listed. And so my sister, love her, she's still my best friend, she looked him up on Facebook. And I started messaging back and forth to him, and he said, yes, you know, I was with your mom at some point. The timeline of all of this seems off, but I would love to pay for a DNA test. And I got my hopes again, that wholeness. I was like, this is going to make me whole. I'm going to, you know, probably go live with him. It's going to be amazing. And when that DNA test came back negative, holy hell. My husband, actually, we had just started dating like 4 months prior. So we've been together since we were I think I was 16 and he was 17. And so that almost broke us up because I closed off the world. I just laid in bed for days. It was really hard because I was relying on my wholeness in a biological father. So as God does, I pushed it under the rug and thought that I could just move on. And then I had the kids and all of the postpartum came back. And so I really, again, had to find my wholeness in Christ. And so I did Ancestry in 21, and that was just the best that I'd ever been. You know, I felt the healing. I had done so much work on myself, so much work with my relationship with God. And I really felt like I was at a good place. I didn't get any sort of leading information back until February of last year. So almost a year later.
Wow.
And I was a little frustrated. But of course, looking back, I see the amount of growth that happened again between June and February of the next year. That is when I gave birth. You know, or I didn't give birth, but my youngest got older and I was able to heal and start to say, who am I in Christ and what makes me me? And, you know, kind of uncover the areas that still needed to be uncovered. And so I got a message back on Ancestry from who showed up as a cousin. Because when I first did it and things, I messaged everyone. I was like, this is my story. This is a picture of my bio mom, and just crickets. And so I honestly had kind of given up. And so February, I still remember where I was sitting. It popped up on my phone. You have a new message on Ancestry. And I quick jumped on the computer, and it was someone saying she popped up as a cousin. And she said, yes, my father had, I believe, 6 siblings, 4 of which were brothers who grew up in Oakland. I'm from Fairfield, so that's like 30 minutes. And it's very likely. So I added her on Facebook and we kind of went back and forth. We thought maybe it was her father, but he had already passed away due to drugs. We kind of eliminated them one by one. And the last one, he didn't have any kids. He had never had any kids. He got married a little older in life. She had older kids. She didn't want any other kids. And so it kind of was like, all right, here's another dead end. Thankfully, because of my healing, it didn't crush me. But I was disappointed. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. And so probably a week or so later, I went shopping with a friend. Again, I remember exactly where I was when she messaged me and she said, what was your birth mother's name? My uncle just had a realization he had a one-night stand with a woman who has the same name as your birth mother. And if her name is this, he's your father. I don't think I've said so many cuss words in a store in my life. And my friends, are you okay? And I still remember, she was like, this is so good. This was so good. And that, I just couldn't feel that feeling. I was just in shock. And I was like, of course it's good. But like now almost all of the questions I had pushed down, I now wanted answers. I wanted answers to everything. And so I came home, told my husband, hey, found my birthday. He's like, what? And I was like, I have to go upstairs and call him. Because my cousin gave me a phone number. I was like, I have to rip the Band-Aid off. I've waited 28 years for this. I'm going to just do it. So I called him up. Come to find out, it was a one-night stand. He saw my birth mother in a bar a couple weeks later because he actually worked for my birth grandmother. And she said, hey, do you know that birth mother's pregnant? And he was like, no. And my birth grandmother was like, oh, don't worry. She slept with 10 other guys since then. It's not yours. So my birth dad did try to approach her and she wanted nothing to do with him. And so he's like, okay, I guess it's not mine. I guess that's it. And so we talked, I think for like 2 hours that first time. And it was, I mean, I still like get chills thinking about it because, and I called my therapist up after, and my biggest thing was like, this doesn't happen. This doesn't, I already struggle being positive sometimes. It's something that I'm working on, but I guess I had also just accepted that the redemption of my birth story would either I would get answers in heaven or I wouldn't care in heaven. And so I kind of had just become settled in that place. So when this door swung wide open, he's an amazing man. He has no birth kids. He's wanted a daughter specifically since he was 16.
Oh my goodness.
And he heard this like song on the record player about a daughter and who has always wanted grandkids. I'm like, you have 2 granddaughters, you have a son-in-law, just like the most kind. And even on that first call, he was like, the ball is in your court. I want us to go at the pace that you're comfortable going. If you have any questions, I want you to ask them. Just like the respect. Because I had, even when I searched, I said, he's either going to be dead or he's going to be a man that I don't want to be around. I don't want my family to be around. And so it took a lot of kind of switching mindset, which was tough. It was hard. But it's been so good. So that was February. He came out in June and met us, and we were all eating dinner, and my husband looked at me and he just started laughing. And he was like, I'm not used to anyone having your mannerisms except for your sister. Like when we go to your side of the family, like like no one looks like you, no one acts like you. And he's like, this is creepy. So when you try to say that nature doesn't matter, it's all about nurture, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And it was just so easy and natural. And, there were still moments where I would just give my husband a look and just like go lay in my bed for an hour because it was completely overwhelming, but it has been so good. We talk on the phone probably every other week. We FaceTimed. He had never sent an email or gotten on FaceTime before. He's like in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire. And so it has just turned both of our lives upside down in the best way. And again, I just after my first therapy appointment, I just drove home, tears streaming down my face I had never felt God's love more fully. Like I didn't need this to be okay at this point in my life. I did earlier, but I didn't need this in my life to be okay. And for God to still give it to me, to give it to my girls, for them to have a Grampy, and his wife is amazing. That was my other fear. Like, is she going to be like, no way? No, she's Grammy. He's Grampy. They sent Christmas presents. Like, it's just, how can you not believe? Like that song just echoes in my brain of he is a good God, even in the hard, and the redemption that is now a part of my story, Earthside, that I just never thought would happen is amazing. Amazing.
Wow. Oh, it's so incredible. Yeah. So I was going to ask, it's interesting that you said even in the hard, because I was going to say, would you say you've experienced Jesus even in the hard?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think even in those hard moments, I feel him closer than ever before, because I think it's pretty common for adoptees to erect walls around them. When you're used to people leaving you, even as a baby, the body keeps score. If you put up walls, it won't hurt if people leave. You can't control if they leave or not, but at least if they do, the wall is up. And I had that even with God. I had that with Jesus. I will let you in, but only so much. And I'm going to have the wall up because I'm used to being hurt. And I think this whole experience has torn that wall down. That even in the hurt, I'm able now to see the good and the love, and even see the hurt for my good and his glory, where I just wasn't able to see it before. And so I think, again, God's timing is everything. And that's definitely something my dad and I both struggle with, is why now? We missed out on 28 years of life together. He struggles if he's like, if I want to know about you, I would have, we just go into woulda, coulda, shoulda. Yeah. And that's where Christ draws us back in, but God's timing, but his sovereignty, but his power. And that is the only place to find rest in my story.
Wow. Well, man, I appreciate, it gets me excited. I can feel your excitement. It does draw me to worship, because I just think, what a God we serve.
Yeah.
I would just love to give you the opportunity as we close out here, April, is there anything just on your heart that you would love to share with our listeners before we close?
Yeah. I mean, like I've already said before, I just have such a heart for the foster care and adoption spaces. I feel Thankfully, the narrative is moving towards relationship with biological family and realizing the importance and realizing the trauma that even adoptees taken away at birth experience. But I still think there's work to be done. And again, that's where my coaching comes in, where I can come alongside these families and, you know, they're such unique things, right? Like my birth father popping up out when I'm 28 and how do you navigate that? And also, how do you navigate that as an adoptive parent, maybe of a minor child and keeping them safe while still allowing the relationship? There's just so many nuances of adoption and foster care that because of my lived experience, because of the story God has given me, I really believe he wants us to use that. And so I'm so passionate about that. I'm a full-time student, as you mentioned earlier, so I'm just trying to get to the finish line in June. But then I just want to teach and speak and write and just share, again, the love of God, but also the tools that we can have on earth to wrestle with our stories and allow our children to wrestle with their stories and to, again, hopefully not wait until they're 24 and really struggling to start that healing process. And because of my parents, again, just stopped foster care about 6 months ago. They're 80. That is just a whole nother amount of expertise. And I have a couple friends who are foster parents and they're just like, oh my goodness, this happened today. Like, what would you do? And I just give them resources and advice based off of my lived experience. And so I just love to do that, because I do think foster care and adoption oftentimes can feel so isolating, both for the adoptee, but for the family. For the adoptee, they don't look like me, they don't sound like me, they don't act like me. But then for the adoptive family of like, I love this child so much, but again, there just seems to be a wall that I can't get over. And so I give them tools to start chipping away at that wall to get to that child. Same thing with foster care, those... It's not easy. I remember the transition period every time a child came into our home. And again, just giving parents tools to chip away at that wall, to love these kids better so that they can have more full lives. They can start healing quicker and so that they can feel the fullness of God sooner than I did.
Yeah. April, I think before we close, I want to give you one final opportunity. I did not... will you speak to your birth dad? What he means to you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It just, again, it's a place where you think you've healed, but there's a little April inside that was screaming, like, I just want my daddy. And I felt that when he left after I met him I just want him. And, thankfully we have a heavenly father, but again, God created family, a biological father and a biological mother. And so he has filled a place in me that needed to be filled. And he has given me a peace that I haven't experienced before him. And he has just been everything above and beyond what I even hoped for and prayed for. Just like on Christmas Day, we FaceTimed him and I met his wife's kids and family. And like for him to even want to include me through FaceTime by that, it's amazing. Like I feel like I belong and he's given that to me. That's been him to give that to me. And the way that he's just, oh my goodness, he's smitten with my girls. They just grampy and he's like, yeah. And
I love it.
It is just because I have amazing in-laws and I have amazing adoptive parents, but he just comes in and kind of fills this void. And even my girls, the way they talk about him, he got them coloring books for Christmas. And my youngest, she's hilarious, but she's like, Grampy, you must really know us because you got us the best Christmas presents out of anyone. She just, and he just beams with that, but it's true. And that's why you can't outlove an adoptee's want for biological family. You can't outcare an adoptee's need for biological family. And so again, he has been what I didn't even know I needed. He's been what I wanted. And the hardest part about it all is I'm in Oregon and he's in New Hampshire.
Wow. Well, April, thank you so much for sharing your story. Oh my goodness, this has been a time that has just been, we're all better for it. So I really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.